Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AP European History Preview Night number 1 to help you prep for the AP Euro exam. My name is Kristen, and I'm the teacher host for AP Euro. We're going to go through a few community guidelines and just explain a little bit about the Cram sessions. Our hosts are going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to see a sampling of Unit 1 tonight, so you can kind of get an idea and taste for what the Cram sessions will look like starting on May 5th. So just a few community agreements and guidelines before we get started. We want everyone to be super supportive of one another. Let's lift each other up. Also be patient. This is our first preview night. There may be a few little tech issues or some other things that pop up, but we're going to have 5 nights together next week, and we've got 2 preview nights to figure things out. So everything's going to go great, but just be patient with us, please. And then be kind. We are all real people. I am a real teacher. They are all real students. So just kind of give us some grace and treat us with kindness. So how to make the most of a preview. We suggest you take notes while we're going through these slides. Like I said, tonight's going to be just an example of Unit 1. So we pulled some pieces of the Unit 1 information. So take some active notes. Don't jot everything down, though. You won't have time, okay? You can utilize the chat if you've got any tips or tricks for the different units that we cover. If you've got a question, this is a great spot to ask a question in. And then there's going to be a Q&A tab as well for asking any additional questions. Check the comments for answers on those questions. During the actual Cram sessions, we will be taking breaks throughout the evening. They are 3 hours. Tonight, since it's just an hour, we're going to power right through. And then you'll be able to replay this information under My Stuff if you feel like you need to go back and rewatch anything. So just a quick shout out for Cram mode. We highly suggest that you sign up for Cram mode. This unlocks so much amazing information, study tools, test prep books, access to tens of thousands of practice multiple choice questions, and you also get a ticket to all 5 of the Cram nights. So these are going to be the 5 nights before your AP Euro exam. All right, so this is going to be our schedule starting next week. So Sunday evening, May 5th, we're going to start with Units 1 and 2. Then we'll jump into Units 3, 4, and 5. So May 6th is going to be a pretty busy night. May 7th will be 6 and 7. May 8th will be Units 8 and 9. And then that final night before your exam, we're just going to wrap things up, go over any questions that people had, go over FRQ practice, do some more multiple choice practice, and then leave it open for any additional questions that y'all may have. So we're going to take a second, and our student hosts are going to introduce themselves, and you may see that they've also selected a European figure to represent them. So let's get started with Hannah.
Hey guys, my name is Hannah Bradley, and my favorite European history figure is by far Marie Antoinette. I think she's fascinating, and I'm so excited to get to hang out with y'all for the next 2 weeks.
All right, Malin.
Hi guys, I'm Malin. My favorite historical figure is definitely Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth I, and I am excited to see you guys kind of throughout all of our Cram sessions.
Awesome. All right, Maddie.
Hi everyone, I'm Maddie. I chose Catherine of Aragon because I thought she was just such a cool figure when I was learning about her, and really she created one of the best monarchs ever, Elizabeth I. Mary, Queen Mary, but I think she was just super awesome. And so I'm really excited to spend this time with you guys.
Awesome. All right, Mariam.
Hey everybody, I'm Mariam, and I picked Peter the Great, obviously one of the best Tsars in existence, in my opinion. Just loved all the reform that he did for Russia. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here, hanging out with you guys, and helping all of you guys with the AP Euro exam.
All right, and then Eliana.
Hi guys, I'm Eliana. I'll be in the chat all night, and I chose Virginia Woolf. She is my favorite European history figure and also my favorite author. So,
Very nice. And then I am Kristen. Again, I'm the teacher host. I teach AP Euro, AP World History as well. And I chose Ada Lovelace because she's just really cool and she's considered one of the first computer programmers, which I think is just an incredible feat. All right, so here's our agenda real quick. I already talked a little bit about the crams. Again, make sure you sign up for those. We'll remind you at the end. We're going to review part of Unit 1 tonight. We'll do some practice MCQ questions, and then if we have any additional time at the end, we'll have a little Q&A session, go over any questions that came up in the chat. And so we're going to go ahead and get started, and Mariam is going to kick us off by going over some of Unit 1.
All right, can everyone see the slides? Maybe just give a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. All right, so we're just going to be starting then with Unit 1, as Kristen said. So we're going to start off with the Renaissance, obviously a very important event and sort of, underlying movement that happened in this period that you should know. So the Renaissance literally means rebirth in Italian, and it is a rebirth of classical Greek and Roman antiquity. Many intellectuals showed an interest in classical Greek and Roman civilizations. So basically, sort of during this period and after the Black Death, a lot of these classical texts from classic Greek and Rome were sort of forgotten and lost, but there were these Arabic scholars that sort of translated these texts back into Latin, and this allowed many Europeans, or the educated Europeans, to sort of gain access to this information once again. So it sparked sort of a rebirth of these texts. And a key concept you're going to want to know is humanism. Intellectuals focused on the individual and their potential, and this was a shift from the medieval times where religion was the main focus. So think about the Romanesque and Gothic times, sort of like that. It's very focused on Christianity, but there's sort of a shift in that, and we're sort of moving away from the church a little bit. And we have the School of Athens here on our right by Raphael. Very classic and timeless painting of the Renaissance, and it sort of showcases a lot of artistic ideals that exist in this movement, which we'll sort of start to go over in a little bit. So we're going to talk about the role of Italian city-states, because you should definitely know that sort of the heart of the Renaissance was in Florence, Italy. And why was it Italy? So these city-states, you have to remember, Italy right now was not a sovereign country. It was composed of a bunch of little nations like Florence, Naples, things like that, as you can see on the map, city-states. And they became a hub of trade. Obviously, Italy is right in the Mediterranean, so there's going to be a lot of trade and merchants coming in and out of Italy. And this is going to allow an exchange of ideas as these merchants traveled through the Silk Road to Asia, within Europe, and this is going to allow many different ideals to be exchanged in Italy. And as I said before, Florence, Italy is sort of the birthplace of the Renaissance, and we have these sort of very wealthy families that not only controlled banking, but they also had a say in the government. And the key one you're going to want to know is the Medici family, and they greatly supported the arts and helped the city flourish. So let's move on to sort of a discussion question. So let's explain how the revival of classical texts contributed to the development of the Renaissance. So we're just going to sort of go through it together. If you have any ideas about how you would answer this, you can sort of put those in the chat, and my fellow co-hosts will sort of look through them. So I would just say, sort of as we've already been talking about, because of these the revival of the classical texts allowed many Europeans, especially educated and literate Europeans, to sort of gain access to these ideas. And this allowed them to develop their own sort of ideas based off of the classical texts, like humanism, secularism, individualism. So that's sort of a basic answer that I would say to that. Again, I'm sure you guys are going to have some amazing answers to this in the chat, but yeah, that's sort of how I would go over that. So we will move on. So next we're going to start to go into some very influential key figures of the Renaissance that you should definitely know for your exam. So, of course, you probably heard of him, Leonardo da Vinci. He's an inventor, artist, scholar, and so much more, the true Renaissance man. He's notably known for painting the Mona Lisa and also the Last Supper, which is not pictured here. And something you should sort of know about his art style is that he pioneered sort of naturalism. So if you look at the Mona Lisa, she looks like a woman, right? She doesn't look like these earlier figures in like Byzantine art where they look really flat in 2D. She looks very realistic and very naturalistic, which is sort of an ideal, and it's going to be shown in this art. Additionally, he's sort of Leonardo da Vinci's sort of key artistic style was sfumato, which is sort of this like smokiness. So you can see like the blending of the colors and stuff. It looks a little smoky. And he also urged artists to depict their subjects in a way that reflected their inherent qualities. So like I was describing before, sort of naturalism and that idea of that. Additionally, oh yeah, you can see, I'm sure you guys know this meme on the right, the Da Vinci. So yeah, make sure you know Leonardo da Vinci. He's for sure going to come up on your exam. So next figure, Michelangelo. He is more known for being a sculptor, but he was also a painter. Best known for his work on the Sistine Chapel as pictured above. And something we want to see in this art, the figures are very idealized, but they also look very realistic, right? These look like, you know, men and like humans, sort of comparing that back to the earlier artistic movements, like Gothic and Romanesque and Byzantine, like that looks nothing like this. Also, it's sort of important to remember the idea of nudity that came with the Renaissance and the Renaissance art. This was, you know, very scandalous at the time, and sort of a whole reason why Renaissance artists start to incorporate nudity into their art is sort of this idea of humanism and, you know, achieving their best potential. So it's sort of like showing an idealized body and what that looks like. He also created the statue of David. Make sure you know the difference between Michelangelo's David and Donatello's David, as those are two very different figures with very different ideas. Michelangelo's David in particular is also sort of showcasing this idea of idealism, strong muscularism, muscular man, and Donatello's David is sort of this more flirty, feminine man, which was very scandalous at the time. Let me see. I see we have a question. Oh, so what are some important arts we need to know? I wouldn't necessarily say you need to know like specific artworks. It's good to be familiar with a couple of iconic ones, like, you know, the sculptures that I mentioned, Michelangelo's David, Donatello's David. But typically when they ask you about an art piece or an art movement on the exam, they're not just going to ask you to recall it from memory. They're going to provide some sort of stimuli that's going to be shown to you on the exam. So more so knowing the movements. Right now, we just have these visuals and paintings to sort of help you really understand what the artistic style was like at this time. So I hope that helps answer your question. So yeah, we're going to move on. Okay, so Petrarch. Definitely know him. He's considered the father of the Renaissance. And even although he was alive before 1450, which is when this course starts, he sort of is tokened with the discovery of humanism and the development of it. He saw the Middle Ages as a period of intellectual darkness, and he discovered and compiled many classical texts by Cicero, which was who he was directly inspired by. And he was one of the first scholars to write in the Italian vernacular. So definitely know Petrarch. He's sort of the father of the Renaissance, as I said, and he was the one who sort of developed the idea of humanism. So we'll move on. Ooh, okay, so Brunelleschi. He's an Italian architect. He's one of the first pioneers of Renaissance architecture. And what we mean by that is sort of in Renaissance architecture, similar to Renaissance art, there's sort of a return to the classical Greek and Rome ideals and standards of art and architecture. So the dome, the arches, you know, that's very classical Rome, classical Greece. And in fact, he created Brunelleschi's dome in Florence. And he was sort of one of the first people that championed this return to the use of the dome in architecture. He was also commissioned by the Medicis to rebuild the Church of San Lorenzo in Florence and seen as the first modern engineer. Something I also forgot to mention with Michelangelo, he was also commissioned by the Medicis as well as the Pope and really wealthy families and the Pope are going to be sort of the two main patrons of art and architecture in this time period. So what that sort of means is they're these very rich, influential figures that are sort of asking artists and architects to sort of make work, and they're giving them the money to do so. So when I say they're patrons, that's sort of what I mean by that. Okay, so sort of to sum up what we've been talking about, innovations in art and sort of the shift in Renaissance art. So classical themes, the subject matter shifted to emphasize humans and the qualities of the individual rather than revolving around religion. Sort of through what we've already looked at in all those artworks, it's not really about religion and Christianity because of these ideals of humanism and individualism and championing your individual thoughts and ideals and your humanistic potential. That's going to really be shown in the art. And again, as we've been talking about, naturalism, Renaissance artists hope to sort of make their art seem very realistic and very 3D, and they wanted to create very realistic works. And then geometric perspective, they utilized math to create further realism and an appearance of 3D figures in a 2D space. So sort of creating depth and sort of adding on to that naturalism that they were trying to achieve. So that's sort of just to sum up what you have to know about the innovations and the changes in art. Okay, and then sort of one last note, religious themes. So when we're talking about the medieval times, obviously these values are circling around living a religious life. It's your life is centered around the church. And then when we move on into the Renaissance, these scholars begin to value more worldly interests. So there's still, but that doesn't necessarily coincide with not following the church at all and not utilizing it in some way. They just didn't fixate on religion as much as traditionally. And if you really think about it, classic Greek mythology and Roman mythology, that's very polytheistic. And we can see those ideals of polytheism as well in Renaissance art, such as The Birth of Venus by Sandro Botticelli. So even though we're not seeing as much of a presence of the church in art, it's not necessarily completely gone away, you know? So they're just not focused on it as much. Okay. I see a question here. What was the difference in purpose the Medici family and the Pope had when commissioning art? I mean, I think I would definitely say the Pope had a lot more of thought of the Catholic Church into it. So like when he commissioned Michelangelo to sort of work on the works in the Vatican City, that was sort of more in order to make these because the buildings that he commissioned Michelangelo to work on are sort of the Catholic Church. So he definitely had the Catholic Church in mind when he was commissioning these works. I would say the Medici family weren't as fixated on the Catholic Church and religion. The works that they commissioned were more so a little more secular. So that's sort of already illustrating the difference that we see in religion versus secularism. So I hope that answered your question. Okay, so I'm going to sort of transfer over now, and Maddie is going to take over. So thank you, everyone.
Let me share my screen. All right. All right. Give me just a sec, sorry. All right, can you guys see that okay? All right, wonderful. So I just want to finish off Mariam's section there with a little discussion question. How did Renaissance art reflect the values of humanism? So you guys can totally go ahead and write some responses to this in the chat, but also I want to talk about my perspective of it a little. So as you can see by all of the pieces of art we included within the presentation so far, they all very much had an emphasis on the human being and kind of this idealized image of a human, which was very much going along with the theme of humanism, which is this idea of celebrating the potential of humanity and everything we were able to accomplish, which was definitely a shift away from the beliefs of the Middle Ages that humans were evil inherently and doomed to go to hell. So, all right. Now I want to touch a little bit on secularism within writing in the Renaissance. So the largest proponent of secularism within writing, which is basically a shift away from religion, secularism is not anti-religious, but not a religious topic. So Niccolo Machiavelli was the largest proponent, and he, alongside other philosophers within the Renaissance, began to shift towards more secular topics. So what do I mean by more secular topics? Well, in his novel, The Prince, he advocated for more absolute and ruthless rulers. So what I mean by this is when you look forward a bit in history and you see these really like very strong, powerful, very hard and fast leaders within European history, this is what he was advocating for. And one reason why this also was considered more secular was because Machiavelli advised that rulers should actually use religion solely as a means to govern, but not as a means of morals, not like a set of morals, which is typically how we would view religion, solely as a means to control their nation. All right. Next, I want to talk more about the Northern Renaissance. So we just covered a bunch of the Italian Renaissance, now the Northern Renaissance. So to begin, the Northern Renaissance spread for a couple reasons, one of them being technological advances at the time. So specifically, one of my favorite ones to bring up here is the printing press. The printing press made it possible for ideas to be mass-produced rapidly and spread across continental and non-continental Europe. And because of this, it really allowed, again, that spread of ideas and the travel of Renaissance ideas from Italy to Northern Europe. And another reason why the Northern Renaissance began was due to the travel of trade. So when different nations within Europe interacted during their times traveling, again, remember the Renaissance was also a very big period of exploration, colonizing the New World, and kind of these beginning seeds of imperialism. As these countries met overseas, they traded not only goods, but also ideas. And then finally, the Northern Renaissance truly was a borrowing of ideas, not only from the Italian Renaissance, but again, those Greek and classical texts. So this idea of recycling ideas was a really big part of the Northern Renaissance as well. All right. So some distinctive features of the Northern Renaissance. I have a couple sections here. These are all important to note. To begin, we have some distinctive features of visual arts in the Northern Renaissance. So Northern Renaissance art was very, very human-centered, with this emphasis on a depiction of everyday life and accuracy. So when we think about the art we just looked at in the Italian Renaissance portion, there was definitely a lot of like idealization of the human and really showing how a human should look if they were perfect. The emphasis within the Northern Renaissance was more of an everyday life, an accurate depiction of if you looked at the countryside in England, what would you see? You know, instead of if you looked at this religious figure, who would you see? And then also, artists relied very heavily on the patronage of the church. The Italian Renaissance tended to be a bit more secular, as I mentioned, with Machiavelli. So the Northern Renaissance was religion was more ingrained. So the church was extremely important as a patron of the arts, when the Northern Renaissance didn't necessarily have the same patrons like the Medici family. And then some of the most distinctive values of the Northern Renaissance, again, like I said, was a more religious focus, which included Christian humanism. So Christian humanism, just a quick definition of this, would be this idea of humanism that maximizing the human potential was combined with a desire for a deeper understanding of Christianity. So what I mean by this is kind of looking at how Christianity currently was a part of everyday human life and seeing how these philosophers could more deeply and more better understand Christianity as a whole, which, as we'll talk about later, really did begin to provoke some ideas of religious reform. And that brings me to our last section here, which is the secularism of the Renaissance, really began to provoke a call for religious reform. And what I mean by that is many religious reformers and many Christian humanists disliked the way that churches were placed so much emphasis on material wealth, and they also disliked the patronage of artists. So they really wanted religious or churches to remain more separate from the idea of wealth and that patronage. And we'll definitely touch more on that with a couple of our historical figures here. So to begin, we have Rembrandt. Rembrandt was a Dutch artist, so very key for this idea of the Northern Renaissance. As you can see here, we have one of his paintings called The Night Watch. And Rembrandt was a master of light and shadow. So I think this painting is a really great example of that, because you can really see how his use of lighter colors and just in all these kind of like pops of light and not so much color, but definitely of light, really emphasize parts of the painting that he wants you to focus on. So for example, this man right here at the front, and then this woman back here, they're popping off, almost like off of the page, they're calling to you, which is a really powerful way of Rembrandt trying to get the viewer of the painting to pick more up on his message. And then finally, he was committed to depicting his subjects very realistically. So as you can see here, these all look like humans. They don't look like gods. They don't look like really big, important, idealized human beings. They look like regular human beings. And that was a very, very key part of art in the Northern Renaissance, a very defining factor, something that will help you distinguish between the two. Now we have Erasmus. So Erasmus was, go Netherlands, another Dutch man. He was a Dutch Christian humanist, and he called for reform within the church. So he is one of these humanists that I said kind of looked more deeply into Christianity and began to question what they were seeing. So Erasmus advocated that people should read and interpret the Bible on their own, which up until the Renaissance really was not very possible, because typically the Bible was only available in Latin, which people already couldn't read or write. And also most of your average peasants were illiterate. So even if they knew Latin, they couldn't read it. And so he really wanted people to be able to have the ability to read and interpret the Bible, which would come along with the invention of the printing press. And finally, he wrote The Praise of Folly, which was a satirized telling of the corruption of the papacy and the clergy. And a really great example of this corruption that he was calling out were papal indulgences. So this was like the heavy taxing of the peasantry as a means of funding the wealth of the church, which is something, again, the Northern Renaissance really spoke out against. And that is going to be a big connection to Martin Luther, which we'll talk about more in another unit. Next, we have Albrecht Durer. So he was a German artist. And something that was really interesting and important about Durer was that he combined the ideas of the Northern and Italian Renaissance. So he was kind of the middleman between the two. And I think when you look at his art, you can definitely see that. So he specialized in painting, prints, and woodcuts. As you can see here, this is a woodcut of a rhinoceros. And again, he traveled to Italy to study from Renaissance artists, which in turn caused this kind of fusion art. So something I like to point out for this piece of art is that it's a very realistic depiction of a rhinoceros. I feel like if you looked at a rhinoceros, this is what you would see. However, it is not necessarily what a typical Northern Renaissance artist would paint, due to the fact that it's not a depiction of everyday life. And by that, I mean, if you were on the German countryside, you wouldn't see a rhinoceros, right? This isn't like a regular old depiction of like the last painting, The Night Watch. And so that is really combining this idea of a more idealized world versus a more realistic world that you see in the Northern Renaissance. Next, we have Thomas More. So Thomas More was an English Christian humanist, so still along those same lines, but in this time in England. And he was actually a very important figure in the British government. He was an advisor for King Henry VIII, and we know how that goes. So, but his main thing that we want to discuss here is the fact that he wrote Utopia. So Utopia was this book describing what Thomas More believed to be a perfect world or a perfect society. And something that was really interesting about Utopia was not just its idea, because of course people are always idealizing and always thinking of ways to better the world around them, but truly it was the things he was calling for within his book. So More actually called for a more just society, more education for women, and also the abolition of private property. And all of these ideas are really radical and novel for his time during the Renaissance, because as we know, most of these ideas didn't come back up again as big talking points until the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. So it's really interesting to see how these ideas have always been present within Europe, but at this time, he was kind of the first to call for them, which is super interesting. And then just looking to see a couple questions here. How come Renaissance artists were commissioned by churches and religious figures, even though arts shifted from religious themes to more secular ones? This is a really great question. A great way to think about this is that it wasn't so much that there weren't that the churches and religious figures, or that the churches were like the big proponents of the secular themes. It just so happens that Italy was a very oligarchical society, so it was run by these really wealthy and powerful families, like we said, like the Medicis. And so it's really important to kind of mention that the people who were the patrons of the arts could really only be the churches, or here and there, like a possibly more rich family, but churches were really the main patrons if you take away the wealthy families like the Medicis. And then, let's see. So the Northern Renaissance had Christian humanism, but less religious art. Yeah, so in the Northern Renaissance, a great way to think about like how these two are separate is the fact that you had these Christian humanists were, yes, still very religious, but they were looking into more reform of the church. And so it's really interesting to kind of see how when you start questioning like the ideals of a religion, how sometimes people tend to shift away from it. And again, it was less so like less religious art as a whole, but more everyday, a focus on everyday life, which inherently was not extremely religious by this time. All right. Let me see here. So next, we have just a quick multiple choice question for you guys. What was a consequence of Renaissance thought and societal roles during this period? So let's see here. We have a couple options. A gradual shift towards valuing individuals for their talents rather than their birth status occurred among elites. B, peasants uniformly adopt humanist principles, leading them to successfully demand representation in government bodies immediately. C, there was a universal acceptance and integration into society for all minority groups across Europe due to increased individualism. Or D, an immediate end to feudal practices took place throughout all regions affected by Renaissance ideas. So if you guys, let's see here. If you guys want to answer, we actually have this as a poll. So if you go to the like bar graph section on the sidebar there, you'll be able to put your answer. I'm pretty sure it pops up for you guys. Or you can just leave it in the chat. Yes, I see lots of people saying A. I see lots of people saying A here. Yeah, almost 100% of you guys put A. So yes, the answer to this question is A, and that is because it's really important to note that most things in history don't occur extremely rapidly, which a couple of these mention. It takes time to have change happen. So D, as being an immediate end to feudal practices, is almost too much of an absolute to be realistic. And then again, with this like universal acceptance and integration of minority groups, if you think, even if you're getting a little tripped up on like this answer, if you think to more modern history, there's still a struggle to complete integration of minority groups in Europe. So you can probably cross that one off the list. And then finally, peasants uniformly adopt humanist principles. So at this point in time, especially in the very early Renaissance, most peasants weren't going to be immediately exposed to those ideas because they weren't literate and couldn't really read or write any of those ideas. So, all right, yeah, A, here you go. Okay, and then my last but most favorite ideas from the Renaissance, or my favorite invention, I think, of all of European history has to be the printing press. So Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, the beautiful, it's right here, the one and only, which was basically a method. I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like, a method of literally printing texts. And it was text transferred like by this and you literally like have to press it down. But it was a really interesting invention because it allowed for text to be spread rapidly and very widely across Europe. And an example of one of these would actually be the Gutenberg's Bible. So this was the Bible as we all know it, but printed in vernacular language, which is the language of the common people in an area. And this would basically allow people to actually read and understand and interpret the Bible for themselves, which is a really big Christian humanist ideal. And the printing press had some really large effects of increasing literacy rates and, again, the spread of humanist ideas. And all in all, because mass producing these works became easier, quicker, these texts became much more accessible, like I talked about with the Bible. And here we have a really fun little domino effect. Because of this, people were able to interpret the Bible on their own and kind of receive the knowledge and make decisions about the Bible that they might not have previously been able to. And finally, some began to question the Catholic Church, and the Renaissance ideas began to spread. So as we can see, this domino effect of questioning the Catholic Church and Reformation really go hand in hand along with the printing press. And I am going to pass it on to Hannah now to finish off some of the stuff we have.
Awesome. Hi, guys. Okay, so I am just going to try to seamlessly put this up here. All right. Can everyone see this? Let me put myself down back to the main stage. Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay. Cool. So Maddie did an excellent job talking about the printing press, but now we're just going to kind of talk about it in an FRQ sense. So this would be a great short answer to the question. Like you said, this is pretty much the easiest unit. So this is a really good one to nail it and get those points. So evaluate the significance of the printing press on European society during this period. So y'all can kind of put some like bullet points, whatever you're feeling, in the chat. And I'll kind of tell you what I'm thinking. So I would basically say that when we're printing books, we are pretty much just producing knowledge. We're promoting learning languages. We're promoting books being published in people's vernacular. Like we're going to see the Bible go from only being printed in Latin to being printed in German and English, which is going to lead people to have kind of a better understanding of the Bible and roles in the church, which is going to lead them to questioning. So you can kind of see, as we talked about previously, this trickle-down effect that kind of leads to nation-state reforming and Protestant Reformation, all that fun stuff. All right. So yeah, don't be afraid to drop anything in the chat. yeah, so we have like different ideas, heliocentric, Martin Luther, perfect. One second, I'm trying to shift my slide. Okay, cool. So we're going to talk about new monarchs, which is going to be kind of another effect of the Renaissance. So the big idea you guys want to know is that monarchs are just centralizing and strengthening their power, which I feel like is pretty self-explanatory. But there's two main people we kind of talk about when it comes to this. So the first one is going to be Louis IX of France. Basically, we're going to see him just weaken the power of the aristocracy and give monarchies more strength. It might be kind of like, I feel like it's kind of a misunderstanding that like in medieval times, like the kings and the queens had the majority of the power in royal families. However, that wasn't really the case. The nobles kind of had always played a large role in the leadership of the land and area that royal families ruled over. But we're going to see these kings kind of start to take more of the power for themselves. And so Louis IX is actually called the Universal Spider. I'm sure you guys have talked about that in class. And kind of just like, I'd like think about that as kind of like a memory tool to think like he's like strengthening the power. Like I think of like the little like spiders, like webs, like tentacles, and to unify France after the 100 Years' War. That's kind of his thing. And then we have Henry the Seventh of England, and he is going to be the founder of the Tudor dynasty. Basically, his big things are he's going to use diplomacy to avoid wars. He's going to send justices of the peace to like hear cases in his name. So we're going to see more of like delegation of power, because I feel like if you're delegating that power, that kind of gives the kings more almost like clout. You know, they're not going to do the dirty work. And then they're also going to create the court of, will create the court of Star Chamber, which essentially is just going to be controlling the nobility. It's kind of the idea where we're trying noblemen who are kind of too powerful to be brought before common courts so we can lower their power. All right. All right, so next we have diplomacy and alliances. Lovely little Beyonce quote there. So one of the greatest examples of diplomacy that we see during this time is the marriage of Isabella and Ferdinand. I learned that they were like 17 to 18, which is crazy. I did not realize they were that young. That's a little bit young to be marrying to strengthen your country, but hey, great for them. So King Ferdinand ruled the Aragon region of Spain, and Queen Isabella ruled the Castile. I kind of like to remember that. Obviously, it's not crucial, but it's good to drop in an FRQ. I like to think Castile sounds like kind of feminine. Yeah, so they married in the mid-15th century, which unified their powers in Spain, because these are two Spanish regions. So with this became consolidated military power, which is obviously going to lead to more economic and political gains. And together they're going to conquer the kingdom of Navarre. So this is a great example to use for rulers strengthening their political power, their place as rulers, and just creating nation states. All right. Cool. And with diplomacy also became military reforms. So a couple of things that we're going to start seeing, trends we're going to start seeing in the military world, which is of course necessary if we're seeing political reform in order to gain land and to conquer land. You're going to need to kind of adapt your military techniques as well. So we're going to see the start of standing armies, and this is essentially permanent and professional armies. Kind of the idea of paying soldiers when they are working and when they aren't working. These soldiers are going to be more trained, they're going to be more efficient, and we're just going to be moving from cavalries, which is like units on horseback, a very medieval idea, and we are going to be going to more of our like current day army, which is definitely more useful for conquering land. And the guy who is going to be one of the first to establish this is Charles VII of France. Cool. So then we're going to be talking about the rise of the secular state. As we mentioned previously, secularism is kind of just the idea of separating yourself from affiliations with the church. So this can be applied to many different things. But yeah, so kind of one of the first steps to secularism is the Peace of Augsburg. So the Peace of Augsburg was kind of just encourage religious toleration. It was presented by Charles V, who was the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire at this time. Hopefully, I would hope at this point in the game you all know his name. So he is just going to allow rulers to be able to pick, choose the religion that their region practices. However, they only have two options. So, I don't really know how much religious freedom that is, but it's something. So basically, they can choose from Lutheranism or Roman Catholicism. And like I said, this is really only granting religious autonomy to like German princes, knights, and that kind of thing. All right. So our second example is Henry VIII. What a guy. If you guys are unfamiliar with him, this is a guy who had 6 wives. So great musical. Let me know in the chat if you guys have seen it. I have not, but definitely need to put it on my list. So essentially, Henry VIII wanted to be granted a divorce from his first wife, Catherine. And kind of the idea here is that he is a part of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church does not permit divorce. That is like one of their core things. They believe that is a sin. And Henry VIII basically goes, well, screw that. I'll just break away and create his own church. So he's going to create the Anglican Church. Where he is going to be severing all ecclesiastical links with Rome, Vatican, the Pope. So, just kind of doing his own thing. Considering the fact that he had 6 wives, I don't really know how good of a person he was, but at least he's doing his own thing. So as a whole, like I said, I think it's important to think about every little mini concept as how can I tie this into a short answer question. But we're just shifting away from complete control of the Catholic Church and the Pope. And we're just kind of branching out. So just more progressive ideals. All right, so another little FRQ question. How did monarchies lay groundwork for modern nation states? So y'all can drop your kind of thoughts down in the chat. So I would say monarchies are strengthening their power at this time. They're almost creating monopolies on tax collection because they're taking that away from the nobles. So they are gaining their own wealth. They are increasing military force, which is going to allow them to take over more land as long as that's in the certain confines of the Holy Roman Empire. And they're also going to be, the German states will be starting to gain the right to determine the religion of their suspects. So we're definitely going to be going to this era of absolutism. So kind of plugging later units. Cool. All right, cool. So these are just a couple of specifics. I wouldn't necessarily say it's you have to memorize every single one of them, but it's definitely important to know while we are, kind of thinking about what are some good things that we could bring in as context. And also, I'm going to pause real quick. If y'all want to click the green survey button at the bottom anytime to kind of fill it out, it shouldn't take too long. Y'all are welcome to do that. Okay, so back into navigational tools. So, like I said, it's good to just kind of familiarize yourself with this if you're talking about Isabel, Ferdinand, Columbus, da Gama, any of those people. So, first we have the astrolabe. Hopefully I didn't say that wrong, but they're going to improve. It's going to improve navigation. It's basically going to use a sun and star location to determine the way to go. So it's not the same as compass. Compass originates from China, and it is just going to be directional navigation, your typical, north, south, east, west. Hopefully that's self-explanatory. Then we have the caravel. Whenever I see this image, I think of the British, but basically it's just going to be faster than other vessels and strong enough to carry cannons, which is going to be very important in this era and moving forward. And they're just a lot easier to maneuver. We're going to be trying out a lot of different trade routes, ways to go around the tip of Africa and shortcuts. And sailormen. They're definitely going to need the ability to vehicles that are a little bit more flexible, a little bit more higher tech. And then lastly, we have cartography. Obviously, this is something that Columbus had not mastered, but it's the idea of making and studying maps. Explorers are going to really rely on this, and they're going to create them. It's interesting to think that at one point there was a time where there wasn't any concept of the globe or the map. I guess they were in their 2D map era. But anyway, yeah, so these are great to plug for anything navigation or exploration. Cool. And then on the topic of explorers, these are pretty much the two most prominent explorers of AP Euro. I feel like there's not huge emphasis on this, but if that does end up being one of your questions, it's good to know. So Christopher Columbus, obviously pretty self-explanatory, but he believed that he could find a shorter water route to Asia, so particularly India and the Spice Islands. But of course, he's going to end up in the Americans, hence Indians, as he thought that the Native Americans were Indians. And he is going to be given credit for discovering the Americas. Christopher Columbus was basically employed by Isabella and Ferdinand in their attempts to increase the size of their monarchy. An interesting fact is that Isabella was so determined to expand their exploration that she actually had to sell rings and pieces of jewelry to pay for Columbus's journey. The other important guy we've got is Vasco da Gama. He is going to voyage to India around the tip of Africa, so right around Cape Cod. And I think of Vasco like a very long letter, and it's almost outlining Africa. And he is going to basically link Europe and Asia through a water route and creating opportunities for trade and all that fun stuff. Definitely opening up Europe and greater Europe, Asia as well, Africa, to just create more of a globalized world. All right. Okay. And then we've got another FRQ. So in what way did technological innovations contribute to European expansion? So y'all can drop your thoughts in the chat. Okay, so we already talked about printing press. So obviously you could talk about printing press in here because that is a technological innovation. But that's more of a not mental. That's more of a, I guess, intellectual. That's the word I was looking for. Intellectual expansion. But if you're talking about more of a physical expansion, I would definitely talk about Isabella and Ferdinand employing Columbus to quite literally go out, make maps, figure out where is this from a cartography standpoint, and then also trying to look for routes, trying to look for people they can make relationships with, so they can eventually take over that land. Because as we know, taking over land is a very big theme in Euro, and this is the foundation of all of it. All right, cool. And that's all I have. So I hope you all enjoyed that last section. And we are going to do a little quiz to end off the night.
Hey, everyone. So I'm back, and I'm going to be running the quiz. Let me just take a minute here to get set up. Okay. So, sorry guys, give me a minute. I'm gonna put the slide back on so everyone can join up. Okay, so you can use the QR code, or I'm also gonna put the link in the call to action just in case the QR code doesn't work for you. So let me just do that really quick. Is everyone able to see the... Oh, wait. Whoops. There we go. Can everyone see the quiz link? Okay. So we'll just wait till everyone is joined up. Okay. And then we are on a little bit of a time... not a time crunch, but it is getting... Yeah, we're good. Okay. So I'll just try to Okay, so let me share the actual quiz then, and we can start to go through it. Kind of think of this sort of as a Kahoot, except ours are way better, in my opinion. And then hopefully we can hear the audio. Okay, wait. Can we hear the audio or not hear the audio? Okay. Wait, put in chat if you can hear the audio, guys. Okay. We can't. Okay. Sorry about that. We're just gonna have to continue on. Hopefully next time we'll have the audio, guys. It just seems to not be working right now. So we'll just start the quiz. Make sure you're joined in. Okay, we will start it now. Okay. So, what enduring aspect emerged from the literature during the Italian Renaissance? Okay. Let's get those answers in. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and reveal the answer then. Okay, yes, most of us got it right. So it's an increased focus on portraying realistic human emotions and personal experiences. So remembering that shift to humanism and individualism. Yeah, so we will move on since most of us did good on that one. Oh, here. Okay, I'm just going to try to pace it about like 30 seconds to 45 seconds, just make sure we're moving through each question. Yes, okay, good job, guys. Most of us got this too. So Petrarch's works, remember, revival of interest in classical literature and learning, his idol Cicero, and he was one of the early developers of humanism. So we'll move on again since most of us got that one right. Okay, so to what extent did alliances formed by Italian city-states affect power dynamics within Europe? So the complex network of alliances heightened tensions leading up to major conflicts like the 100 Years' War. So just remembering that sort of these alliances that are being formed will sort of increase tensions. And I heard some people were saying they're having a little trouble understanding the questions. So I would say like just try to go over, this is sort of like we're trying to go towards sort of the wording that College Board is going to use on your exam. So if you find yourself having difficulty understanding the wording of these questions, like to what extent, maybe do some research and spend some more time with like the prompts that College Board gives, just so you're familiar with it. So we'll move on. Okay, so in what way did advancements made during the Italian Renaissance alter Europe's understanding of individual identity? So I see some of us put A. Yes, there were an adoption of Greco-Roman ideals, but I wouldn't necessarily say it established a return to classic hero archetypes, and it didn't neglect contemporary influences. Remember what we were talking about? Yes, there was a rebirth of these ideas, but many Europeans also fused the current ideas at the time together to create these new understandings of humanism and individualism. So it wasn't just specifically like these classical influences. There was also contemporary influence on top of that. So that's why C would be the best answer. They prompted a shift towards recognizing self-awareness, artist expression, and personal virtue through previously collective values dominated. Okay, so I hope that helps out the people that put A. But for the most part, again, majority got that right. So we'll move on. Yes. Ooh, okay. So 98%. Yeah. So like we've been talking about, it would have slowed significantly because if we didn't have the printing press, everything would have to be hand copied and it would take a much longer time to spread. So we'll move on. Ooh, okay. So we have sort of a split on this one. What potential shift could occur if Ferdinand and Isabella didn't unite Castile and Aragon through marriage? So the correct answer would be A. Spain might not emerge as a major power in Europe during this time period. I definitely think like Europe exploration and colonization, that's sort of the right track. But I wouldn't say just because if Spain hadn't united that the entirety of exploration and colonization would be delayed. If you think about it, there were many other major European nations that sort of championed exploration during this time period. I would also argue like Portugal would have maybe been the most dominant nation during this time, or initially. So think Portugal and England and France, they also, and the Dutch. So there are these other nations that are sort of doing exploration as well. So I think the more important answer or the better answer would be just Spain individually not emerging as a major power. So I hope that helps. So we will move on. Oh, just stopped. Can you guys still hear the music? Or no? Oh, okay. I can't tell if it just stopped on its own or... Okay. Yeah. It should start back up again, maybe? We'll see. It's being a little unpredictable. But yeah, let's keep getting those answers in. Okay. Yes. So most of us got this right. If he had failed to reach India by sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, trade between Europe and Asia could have remained controlled by land-based routes, so think like the Silk Road, and this would limit wealth accumulation by maritime nations. For those of us that put B, North America would become the primary focus. No, because I think people would still attempt to trade with Asia. If you think about how like the Americas were initially found as well, Columbus was trying to find India so that he could trade with them. So I think that ideal and that area of pursuit would have still remained in mind. So we'll move on. Yes, okay, so their civilizations were disrupted by diseases brought by Europeans because they had no immunity, and this would allow European powers to more easily conquest and conquer them. So thinking like smallpox and things like that were brought from Europe that native peoples had no contact with before, so they had no immunity. So we'll move on. Okay, so how did Age of Discovery alter socioeconomic structures? It enriched Europe through new trade routes, commodities, and slave labor systems. And that one was pretty straightforward, so we'll just move on to the next one. Okay, yes, so improvements in navigational technologies like we were talking about, like the caravan and the astrolabe. I wouldn't say the printing press would directly impact the Age of Discovery and influence the exploration. Also, the way that it was worded, direct impact on naval exploration techniques, I would more so think that the improvement in those technologies would more so help the exploration. So yeah, we'll move on because most of us got that right. And last question. Okay, yeah, so it encouraged critical reflection on social norms, and it's saying, hey, here's an ideal society that we should live by. Remember, that's sort of what Thomas More's ideal was, of like this utopian society that we could, enter. It didn't directly lead to the rise of socialist movements across Europe. I would argue that would be a lot later, not necessarily directly after, because this is asking during its historical situation, so the time period that this was in. Okay, so good job, everyone. I think for the most part, you guys did really, really good on that. So I'm just going to transfer back to the slides here, just to give some quick, just to wrap up. And yeah, so sorry, let me get that out. Okay. Okay. So that's all for today. Make sure to follow us on social media. So YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, X. And again, like we mentioned in the beginning, if you really enjoyed the layout of this preview, or it sort of has been helping you, then maybe consider buying Cram mode, so then you can have access to the full 3-hour Cram sessions that are going to be happening next week. And then additionally, our second preview on Unit 5 is going to be on Wednesday, same time. So it's going to be 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, so that's it. Thank you, everyone. It's been great having you, and hopefully we see you guys on Wednesday. So, thanks.